Sarah Martinez clutched the baby carrier tighter as she walked through the marble corridors of the courthouse. Her 3-month-old daughter, Emma, slept peacefully despite the chaos that was about to unfold. The clicking of Sarah's heels echoed in the empty hallway, each step taking her closer to what she hoped would be the end of her nightmare marriage to David. She had spent countless sleepless nights preparing for this moment, not just because of the newborn who demanded feeding every 2 hours, but because she knew today would change everything. The divorce papers in her leather briefcase contained secrets that would shatter David's carefully constructed world of lies. As Sarah approached courtroom 4B, she took a deep breath and checked her appearance in the glass reflection of a nearby office door. Despite the exhaustion that came with being a new mother, she had made sure to look professional and composed. Her navy blue suit was pressed, her hair was neatly pulled back, and her makeup covered the dark circles under her eyes. She wanted David to see that she had survived without him, that she had thrived even after discovering his betrayal. The security guard at the courtroom entrance gave her a sympathetic smile as she maneuvered the baby carrier through the metal detector. She had called ahead to make sure she could bring Emma, explaining that she had no one else to watch her daughter. The court clerk had been understanding, probably assuming Sarah was another struggling single mother fighting for custody and support. If only they knew the whole truth. Sarah settled into the wooden bench on the left side of the courtroom, positioning Emma's carrier beside her where she could easily rock it if the baby stirred. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the messages from her lawyer, confirming that all the evidence had been submitted properly. DNA test results, financial records, private investigator reports, and medical documentation that would prove everything she was about to reveal. The courtroom slowly began to fill with other people waiting for their cases to be heard. A young couple sat in the front row, holding hands and whispering nervously. Behind them, an older man in an expensive suit reviewed documents with his attorney. Sarah recognized the look of determination mixed with fear on their faces. Divorce court was never easy, regardless of the circumstances. At exactly 9:15, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as David walked in. But what she saw next made her heart race with a mixture of anger and vindication. David wasn't alone. Walking beside him, her arm linked through his in a gesture of intimate support, was Rebecca Chun. Sarah recognized her immediately from the photos in the private investigator's file. Rebecca was David's colleague from the accounting firm where he worked, and, according to the evidence Sarah had gathered, she had been much more than a colleague for over 2 years. Rebecca was stunning in the way that made other women feel instantly inadequate. Her black hair fell in perfect waves to her shoulders. Her makeup was flawless, and her red dress was clearly expensive. She carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had never doubted her place in the world, never wondered if she was enough. What made Sarah's hands clench into fists was the obvious way Rebecca was showing ownership of David. She leaned into him as they walked, whispered something in his ear that made him smile, and even adjusted his tie before they took their seats on the right side of the courtroom. David looked good, Sarah had to admit. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his gray suit was tailored, and he had the tan that came from spending weekends at Rebecca's beach house instead of being home with his pregnant wife. He had gained some weight since Sarah had last seen him 6 months ago, probably from all those expensive dinners Rebecca could afford on her senior accountant salary. As David scanned the courtroom, his eyes found Sarah's. For a moment, she saw surprise flicker across his face, followed quickly by the charming smile he used when he was trying to manipulate a situation. He probably expected her to look defeated, maybe desperate. He certainly didn't expect her to be sitting calmly with a baby carrier beside her. Sarah watched as David's expression changed from surprise to confusion. His eyes moved from her face to the baby carrier and back again. She could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to process what he was seeing. Rebecca noticed David's distraction and followed his gaze to Sarah. Her perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin line when she realized this was David's soon-to-be ex-wife. Sarah could see Rebecca evaluating her, taking in every detail from her professional outfit to the baby carrier. There was something calculating in Rebecca's expression, as if she was trying to determine whether Sarah posed any threat to her future plans. The bailiff called for everyone to rise as Judge Patricia Williams entered the courtroom. Judge Williams was known for being no-nonsense and fair, which was exactly what Sarah hoped for. She had researched the judge extensively, reading transcripts of previous divorce cases to understand her approach to complex family law matters. As they went through the preliminary motions, Sarah kept one eye on David and Rebecca. She noticed how Rebecca squeezed David's hand when the judge began speaking, how she leaned over to whisper reassurances in his ear. It was clear that Rebecca saw herself as David's supportive partner, ready to help him through this difficult divorce so they could start their life together. What Rebecca didn't know was that Sarah had documentation proving David had been stealing money from his own company to pay for their relationship. Expensive gifts, weekend trips, and even the deposit on the apartment Rebecca thought David was renting with his own money. The private investigator had been thorough, tracking every transaction and gathering evidence of David's embezzlement. When Judge Williams called their case, Sarah's lawyer, Jennifer Rodriguez, stood up with confidence. Jennifer was a family law specialist who had handled dozens of high-conflict divorces. She was known for being prepared, aggressive when necessary, and absolutely ruthless when her clients had been betrayed. David's lawyer, an older man named Robert Harrison, looked less confident. Sarah suspected that David hadn't been completely honest with his attorney about the full scope of his affairs, both romantic and financial. Harrison kept shuffling through papers and glancing at David with questions in his eyes. The judge reviewed the basic information about the case, while Sarah's heart pounded. David Martinez, 34, senior accountant at Heartfelt Financial Services. Sarah Martinez, 32, former marketing coordinator who had left her job during pregnancy due to complications. Married for 6 years, separated for 8 months. What the judge was about to learn was that David had filed for divorce the day after Sarah told him she was pregnant. He claimed irreconcilable differences and had been pushing for a quick settlement that would leave Sarah with minimal support. Through his lawyer, David had painted Sarah as an unstable woman who had quit her job impulsively and was now trying to use the pregnancy to trap him in an unhappy marriage. Sarah had let David believe she would accept his terms. She had even signed preliminary agreements that made it look like she was desperate for any settlement he offered. But that was all part of her strategy, developed with Jennifer's guidance over months of careful planning. As the proceedings began, Emma stirred in her carrier and made a small whimpering sound. Sarah quickly reached over to rock the carrier gently, and the baby settled back into sleep. The small interaction caught everyone's attention, including Judge Williams, who looked at Sarah with interest. "Mrs. Martinez," the judge said, "I see you've brought an infant with you today. How old is your daughter?" 3 months, Your Honor," Sarah replied clearly. "She was born on March 15th. Sarah watched David's face carefully as she spoke. She saw the exact moment when he did the math in his head. March 15th. If Emma was born on March 15th, that meant she had been conceived in June. David had filed for divorce in October, which was 4 months after the baby was conceived. The color drained from David's face as he realized what this meant. During all the months he had been claiming that Sarah was trying to trap him with a pregnancy, during all the times he had told Rebecca that his wife was unstable and manipulative, Sarah had actually been pregnant with his child. Rebecca noticed David's reaction and leaned over to whisper something to him. But David seemed frozen. His mouth opened slightly as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Sarah could see the panic in his eyes as he began to understand that his carefully crafted narrative was about to fall apart. Jennifer Rodriguez stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we have some additional evidence to present today that significantly changes the nature of this case. We have DNA evidence confirming that Mr. Martinez is the father of Sarah's daughter, Emma. We also have evidence that Mr. Martinez was having an extramarital affair during the time of conception and throughout Mrs. Martinez's pregnancy." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Sarah heard Rebecca's sharp intake of breath, saw David's hands begin to shake as he gripped the edge of the table. Even Judge Williams, who had probably seen every kind of family drama, looked intrigued by this development. Robert Harrison, David's lawyer, immediately requested a brief recess to confer with his client. Sarah could see the panic in David's eyes as he huddled with his attorney, probably trying to explain how he had failed to mention that his wife had been pregnant during their separation. During the 15-minute break, Sarah calmly fed Emma a bottle while Jennifer reviewed their evidence one final time. They had medical records proving the timing of Emma's conception, DNA test results confirming David's paternity, and documentation of David's affair with Rebecca that went back over 2 years. But that wasn't all they had. Sarah glanced over at David and Rebecca, who were having what appeared to be an intense conversation near the windows. Rebecca's perfect composure was beginning to crack as David apparently tried to explain the situation. Sarah could see Rebecca's hands moving in sharp, angry gestures, and David's face was flushed with embarrassment and fear. What Rebecca didn't know yet was that her own life was about to be turned upside down as well. The private investigator had discovered that David had been embezzling money from Heartfelt Financial Services to finance his lifestyle with Rebecca. Credit card payments for expensive dinners, jewelry, weekend trips to wine country, and even monthly payments on the luxury apartment where Rebecca thought David lived alone. More than that, the investigator had found evidence that Rebecca might have known about some of David's financial irregularities. Email exchanges between them discussing David's bonus money and extra projects that allowed him to afford their expensive lifestyle. Whether Rebecca was an innocent victim or a willing participant in David's crimes would soon be determined. When court resumed, Jennifer began presenting their evidence systematically. First, the DNA results confirming David's paternity. Then, medical records showing that Sarah had suffered complications during her pregnancy that required bed rest, which was why she had left her job. Finally, the timeline proving that David had been having an affair with Rebecca during the entire time Sarah was pregnant. With each piece of evidence, David seemed to shrink further into his seat. Rebecca's face had gone pale, and she kept looking between David and the documents being presented as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The judge listened carefully to each piece of evidence, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Jennifer presented the financial records showing the money David had spent on his affair, Judge Williams's expression became stern. "Mr. Martinez," the judge said, "these records indicate that you spent over $40,000 during your wife's pregnancy on expenses related to your extramarital relationship. Can you explain how you afforded these expenses on your stated salary?" David's lawyer quickly intervened, but Sarah could see that Harrison was struggling. He clearly hadn't been prepared for any of this evidence, and his client had obviously lied to him about significant aspects of the case. As the morning wore on, Sarah felt a growing sense of satisfaction mixed with sadness. She was getting the justice she deserved, but seeing David's world fall apart in front of Rebecca was more painful than she had expected. Despite everything he had done to her, she had once loved this man. She had believed in their future together, had dreamed of raising children with him. Now, watching him squirm as his lies were exposed, she felt mainly relief that she had discovered the truth before wasting more years of her life on someone who was capable of such deception and cruelty. The most damaging evidence was yet to come. Jennifer had saved the best for last, and Sarah knew that the next revelation would change everything for both David and Rebecca. Emma began to fuss again, and Sarah lifted her daughter from the carrier to hold her. The baby's presence in the courtroom was a powerful reminder of what was really at stake in this divorce. This wasn't just about dividing assets or assigning blame. This was about ensuring that Emma would have the financial support she deserved from her father, and that David would face consequences for his betrayal and financial crimes. As Sarah looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, she felt Sarah stopped walking and turned to face Rebecca completely. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the courthouse hallway, Rebecca looked different than she had in the courtroom. The confident, polished woman who had walked in arm with David now seemed smaller, more vulnerable. Her red dress, which had looked so elegant earlier, now seemed too bright, almost garish against her pale complexion. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," Sarah replied evenly, adjusting Emma's carrier on her arm. The baby was still sleeping, oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. Rebecca glanced around the busy hallway, where other people from various court cases were passing by, some speaking in hushed tones with their lawyers, others making phone calls or reviewing documents. She stepped closer to Sarah, lowering her voice. "Please," Rebecca said, "I need to understand what's happening. David told me you two had been separated for over a year. He said the marriage was over long before we started seeing each other. Sarah almost laughed at the desperation in Rebecca's voice. This was the woman who had been so confident just hours earlier, who had touched David's arm possessively and whispered in his ear like she owned him. Now she was pleading for information from the wife she had helped to betray. What David told you and what actually happened are two very different things, Sarah said calmly. But I think you're starting to figure that out. Rebecca's hands were shaking slightly as she clutched her designer purse. The baby, she whispered. When was she really conceived? Because if it was June, then David and I were already sleeping together, Sarah finished. Yes, I know exactly when you and my husband started your affair. I have records of your first weekend trip together to Napa Valley. June 7th and 8th, if you want the specific dates. The color drained from Rebecca's face completely. How do you know about Napa? Sarah studied Rebecca carefully. Despite her anger and hurt, she found herself feeling a small amount of pity for the other woman. Rebecca clearly believed that David had been honest with her, that their relationship had begun after his marriage was essentially over. She was about to learn just how deeply David's deception went. I know about a lot of things, Rebecca. The question is, how much did you know about David's real situation? Did you know he was stealing money from your company to pay for your relationship? Rebecca's eyes widened in shock. What are you talking about? David isn't stealing money. He got a promotion last year, and he's been working on some high-profile accounts that come with bonuses. Now Sarah did laugh, though there was no humor in it. Rebecca, David hasn't gotten a promotion. His salary is exactly what it was 2 years ago. The money he's been spending on you, on your trips, on that apartment he claims to rent, all of it came from falsified expense reports and embezzled client funds. That's impossible, Rebecca said, but her voice lacked conviction. Sarah could see the doubt creeping into her expression as she began to remember conversations with David about money, about his work, about how he could afford their expensive lifestyle. Is it? Sarah asked. Think about it. You work for the same company. You know what senior accountants make. You've seen David's position, his responsibilities. Does his lifestyle match his legitimate income? Rebecca was silent for a long moment, and Sarah could practically see her mind working through the implications. Rebecca was clearly intelligent, successful in her own right, and now she was being forced to confront the possibility that the man she thought she loved was not only a liar and a cheat, but potentially a criminal. I need to sit down, Rebecca said suddenly, looking around for a bench. Sarah guided her to a quiet area near a window where there were some chairs for people waiting for their cases to be called. Emma stirred in her carrier, making small cooing sounds. Sarah automatically began rocking the carrier gently while watching Rebecca process everything she had just learned. How long have you known? Rebecca asked finally. About us, I mean. I started suspecting in August, Sarah replied. David was working late constantly, taking weekend business trips that didn't quite make sense, spending money we didn't have. But I was dealing with pregnancy complications, and I wanted to believe his explanations. Sarah looked down at Emma, remembering those difficult months when she had been on bed rest, worried about losing the baby, while David had been gallivanting around with his lover. I hired a private investigator in September, Sarah continued. By October, I had proof of the affair. By November, I had evidence of the embezzlement. By December, I had DNA confirmation that David was Emma's father, despite his claims that the baby might not be his. Rebecca's face crumpled slightly. He told me you were trying to trap him with someone else's baby. He said you had been unfaithful and were trying to blame him for the pregnancy. The casual cruelty of David's lies took Sarah's breath away for a moment. Even knowing what kind of man he was, she was still capable of being shocked by the depths of his deception. Rebecca, I was faithful to my husband for 6 years of marriage. The only man I was ever with during that time was David. Emma is his daughter, which the DNA test proved conclusively. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching courthouse employees and other people involved in legal proceedings walk past them. Sarah found herself studying Rebecca more closely now that the other woman's defenses were down. Rebecca was probably around Sarah's age, maybe a year or two older. She was clearly successful and well-educated, the kind of woman who would normally have been able to see through David's manipulations. But Sarah understood how charming David could be when he wanted something. How convincing his lies could sound when he looked you in the eye and spoke with complete sincerity. What's going to happen to him? Rebecca asked quietly. If what you're saying about the money is true, what's going to happen? Sarah looked at her carefully. That depends on how much you knew and whether you're willing to cooperate with the investigation. Investigation? Rebecca, we're not just talking about divorce court anymore. When Jennifer presents the evidence of David's embezzlement this afternoon, Judge Williams is going to be legally obligated to refer the matter to the district attorney's office. This is criminal fraud we're talking about. Rebecca put her head in her hands. Oh God, what have I done? For the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah felt genuine sympathy for Rebecca. Whatever her faults, whatever role she had played in the destruction of Sarah's marriage, it was becoming clear that Rebecca had been as much a victim of David's deceptions as Sarah herself. Tell me about the money, Sarah said gently. Think back over the past 2 years. When David paid for expensive dinners, when he bought you jewelry, when he took you on trips, how did he explain where the money came from? Rebecca was quiet for a long time, clearly thinking through their relationship and examining it with new eyes. He said he had been promoted to senior associate. She finally said. He told me he was working on a special project for some of our biggest clients, and that it came with significant bonuses. When I asked him why I hadn't heard about the promotion through office channels, he said management was keeping it quiet because they didn't want other employees to feel overlooked. Sarah nodded. It sounded exactly like the kind of elaborate lie David would construct, complete with enough detail to be believable, but vague enough to avoid verification. What about the apartment? The one he claimed to be renting. He said he needed his own place while the divorce was being finalized, and that he had gotten a good deal from a friend of a friend. The rent seemed reasonable for what it was. Rebecca paused. But, now that I think about it, he never let me see the lease agreement. And sometimes he would get mail delivered to my address instead of his. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Rebecca, David doesn't have an apartment. He's been living in a hotel near the office, paying for it with embezzled funds. The address he gave you is probably a mail forwarding service. The full scope of David's deception was becoming clear, and Sarah could see that Rebecca was finally understanding how completely she had been manipulated. I need to call my lawyer, Rebecca said suddenly, reaching for her phone. If David used company money for our relationship, if I received gifts that were paid for with stolen funds, I could be considered an accessory. That's probably a good idea, Sarah agreed. But, Rebecca, if you're innocent in this, if you genuinely didn't know where the money was coming from, then cooperating with the investigation will help protect you. Rebecca looked at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. Why are you helping me? I slept with your husband. I helped destroy your marriage. Sarah considered the question carefully. 3 months ago, if someone had told her she would be sitting in a courthouse hallway offering legal advice to her husband's lover, she would have thought they were insane. Because, Sarah said finally, I think David lied to both of us. He told you I was unstable and unfaithful. He told me he was working late and traveling for business. He created 2 completely different versions of reality so he could have what he wanted without consequences. Emma woke up and began to fuss. Sarah lifted her daughter from the carrier and held her close, automatically swaying slightly to soothe her. Rebecca watched the interaction with something like wonder in her eyes. She's beautiful, Rebecca said softly. She has David's eyes. Sarah looked down at Emma's face, seeing the truth in Rebecca's observation. Despite everything David had done, Emma was innocent in all of this. She deserved to know her father, even if that father was deeply flawed. Rebecca, Sarah said, there's something else you need to know. Something that's going to come out this afternoon when court resumes. Rebecca tensed. What now? Sarah took a deep breath. This was the information that would probably destroy any remaining feelings Rebecca had for David. But she deserved to know the truth. David isn't just having an affair with you. The private investigator found evidence of at least 2 other relationships over the past year. One with a client's daughter, and another with a woman he met through an online dating service. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She actually recoiled, pressing back against her chair as if trying to get away from the information Sarah was sharing. That's not possible, Rebecca whispered. David and I, we're exclusive. We've been talking about moving in together after his divorce is finalized. He said he loved me. Sarah felt a familiar ache in her chest. the same pain she had experienced when she first learned about David's betrayal. The discovery that the person you loved was capable of such systematic deception was devastating, regardless of the circumstances. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and she meant it. "I know this is a lot to process all at once." Rebecca stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away before turning back to Sarah. "How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't just revenge against me for being with David?" Sarah could understand Rebecca's denial. Accepting the full scope of David's betrayal meant acknowledging that everything she thought she knew about their relationship was a lie. "Because," Sarah said calmly, "in about an hour, Jennifer Rodriguez is going to present photographic evidence and credit card records proving David's other relationships. She's going to show receipts for hotel rooms and restaurant bills with women who aren't either of us. And she's going to demonstrate how all of those expenses were paid for with embezzled funds." Rebecca sat back, down heavily, the fight going out of her. "Why didn't I see it? I'm smart. I'm successful. I'm not naive. How did I let myself be so completely deceived?" Sarah shifted Emma to her other arm, feeling the familiar weight and warmth of her daughter. "Because David is very good at lying. He's had years of practice. And because when someone tells you they love you, when they make you feel special and desired, you want to believe them." The hallway was getting busier as lunch hour approached. People were coming and going from various courtrooms, and Sarah knew they would need to return to their proceedings soon. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked Rebecca. Rebecca was staring out the window, watching traffic move past the courthouse. "I don't know," she said finally. "I need to talk to a lawyer about my legal exposure. I need to figure out if my job is at risk. And I need to decide whether to cooperate with the criminal investigation." She turned to look at Sarah directly. "What do you think I should do?" It was a question Sarah had never expected to be asked by her husband's lover. The situation was so surreal that she almost couldn't believe she was having this conversation. "I think you should tell the truth," Sarah said. "About what you knew, about what David told you, about how the money was spent. If you're innocent, the truth will protect you. If you're not, trying to hide it will only make things worse." Rebecca nodded slowly. "And David?" Sarah looked down at Emma, who was now awake and looking around with the bright curiosity of a 3-month-old baby. "David made his choices. Now he has to live with the consequences." As if summoned by their conversation, David appeared at the end of the hallway. He had clearly been looking for Rebecca, and his face showed both relief and concern when he spotted her. But when he saw that Rebecca was sitting with Sarah, his expression changed to something closer to panic. David approached them cautiously, like someone walking toward a dangerous animal. His confident demeanor from earlier in the morning was completely gone, replaced by the nervous energy of someone who knew his world was falling apart. "Rebecca," he said, "we need to talk. My lawyer wants to go over some things before court resumes." Rebecca looked up at David, and Sarah could see something fundamental had changed in her expression. The adoration and trust that had been there earlier was gone, replaced by suspicion and hurt. "We do need to talk," Rebecca agreed, standing up. "But not about what your lawyer wants to discuss." David's eyes darted between Rebecca and Sarah, clearly trying to assess how much damage had been done during their conversation. "Rebecca, whatever Sarah has told you, you need to understand that she's desperate. She'll say anything to try to turn you against me." It was exactly the wrong thing to say. Sarah watched as Rebecca's face hardened, any remaining doubt about Sarah's truthfulness evaporating in the face of David's immediate attempt at manipulation. "David," Rebecca said coldly, "is Emma your daughter?" The direct question caught David off guard. Sarah could see him calculating, trying to figure out whether he could still lie his way out of the situation. "It's complicated," David said finally. "The timing is unclear, and we're still sorting through the details." "The DNA test isn't complicated," Sarah interjected. "It's definitive. You're Emma's father, David. You were having an affair while I was pregnant with your child." David's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Sarah, you don't understand the whole situation. Rebecca and we have something real. Something you and I never had." "Something real?" Rebecca repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Built on lies about promotions that don't exist? Funded with money stolen from our company? While you were also seeing other women?" David went very still. "What other women?" Sarah realized that Rebecca had just revealed information David didn't know Sarah possessed. Up until this moment, David probably thought the worst thing Sarah could prove was his relationship with Rebecca. The woman from the Madison Hotel, Rebecca continued, her voice getting stronger with anger. The one whose dinner you paid for 3 nights before you told me you were working late. The one you bought a bracelet for using the same credit card you used to buy my earrings. David's mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out. Sarah could see the exact moment when he realized that his entire house of cards was collapsing around him. Or maybe you want to explain the dating profile, Rebecca went on. The one where you described yourself as recently divorced and looking for something casual. Sarah was impressed despite herself. Rebecca had clearly been thinking through everything Sarah had told her, connecting dots and remembering details that had seemed innocent at the time, but now revealed David's systematic deception. People were starting to stare at their conversation, drawn by Rebecca's rising voice and David's obvious distress. Sarah stood up, adjusting Emma in her arms. We should probably take this somewhere more private, she suggested. Court resumes in 20 minutes. But Rebecca wasn't finished. Months of suppressed doubt and ignored red flags were now pouring out as she confronted David with the truth about their relationship. How much money have you stolen, David? How much of our company's money did you spend on your lies? David finally found his voice. Rebecca, please, let me explain. Yes, I made some mistakes with the expenses, but it was just borrowing. I was going to pay it back as soon as the divorce was settled. Borrowing. Sarah couldn't help but interrupt. David, you created Judge Williams called the court to order promptly at 1:30 p.m. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows across the courtroom, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere for what was about to unfold. Sarah noticed that David kept glancing back at Rebecca, who was now sitting 3 rows behind him, her posture rigid and her face carefully composed. Jennifer Rodriguez stood up with the confidence of someone who knew she held all the winning cards. Your Honor, we would like to present additional evidence that relates not only to this divorce proceeding but to criminal matters that we believe require immediate attention from law enforcement. Robert Harrison, David's attorney, immediately objected. Your Honor, we were not informed that criminal allegations would be part of these proceedings. My client is not prepared to respond to charges that haven't been properly filed. Judge Williams looked stern as she addressed both attorneys. Ms. Rodriguez, please explain the nature of these criminal allegations and why they're being presented in a family court proceeding. Jennifer opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Your Honor, during our investigation into Mr. Martinez's assets and expenses, we discovered evidence of systematic embezzlement from his employer, Heartfelt Financial Services. Since these crimes were committed during the marriage and directly impacted the marital estate, we believe they're relevant to the division of assets and determination of support. Sarah watched David's face as Jennifer spoke. His complexion had gone from pale to gray, and she could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the air conditioning in the courtroom. Furthermore, Jennifer continued, the evidence shows that Mr. Martinez used these stolen funds to finance extramarital relationships, which goes directly to the question of fault in this divorce and his fitness as a parent. Judge Williams nodded slowly. I'll allow the presentation of this evidence, but I want to be clear that this court will determine what action needs to be taken regarding any criminal matters. Mr. Harrison, your client has the right to refuse to answer questions that might incriminate him. Harrison whispered urgently in David's ear, but David seemed frozen, unable to respond to his lawyer's advice. Jennifer began by presenting the financial evidence systematically. She had enlarged copies of bank statements, credit card bills, and expense reports mounted on easels so everyone in the courtroom could see them clearly. Your Honor, these are Mr. Martinez's legitimate bank statements showing his actual salary deposits from Heartfelt Financial Services. As you can see, his take-home pay is approximately $4,200 per month after taxes and deductions. She moved to the next easel. These are Mr. Martinez's credit card statements showing expenses totaling over $47,000 during the 18-month period when Mrs. Martinez was pregnant and caring for their newborn daughter. Hotel bills, restaurant charges, jewelry purchases, travel expenses, and rental payments for an apartment. The judge studied the documents carefully. Ms. Rodriguez, How did Mr. Martinez afford these expenses if his legitimate income was insufficient? Jennifer moved to the third easel, which showed copies of falsified expense reports. Mr. Martinez created fake business expenses and submitted them for reimbursement from his employer. He also opened a fraudulent client account and transferred funds from legitimate client accounts into this fake account, then withdrew the money for personal use. Sarah heard Rebecca draw in a sharp breath behind them. Even though Sarah had warned her about the embezzlement, seeing the actual evidence laid out so clearly was obviously shocking. Harrison stood up. "Your Honor, I need to confer with my client. These are serious allegations that go beyond the scope of a divorce proceeding." But Judge Williams was clearly intrigued by the evidence. "Ms. Rodriguez, do you have documentation supporting these claims?" "We do, Your Honor." Jennifer presented certified copies of bank records, employee expense policies, and email correspondence between David and the accounting department at Heartfelt Financial Services. As the evidence was presented, Sarah watched the other people in the courtroom. The young couple from the morning session was gone, but several new observers had come in for afternoon cases. They were all staring at the easels with fascination, probably grateful that their own legal problems seemed simple in comparison. Emma had been sleeping peacefully in her carrier, but now she was starting to wake up and would need feeding soon. Sarah quietly prepared a bottle, hoping she could keep her daughter calm during what was about to become a very intense confrontation. Jennifer moved on to the next phase of evidence. "Your Honor, we also have documentation of Mr. Martinez's multiple extramarital relationships, all of which were financed with embezzled funds." She presented photographs taken by the private investigator showing David with 3 different women over the past year. Sarah recognized Rebecca in several of the photos, but the other women were strangers. Rebecca made a small sound of distress when she saw herself in the photos with David, captured in intimate moments at expensive restaurants and hotels. But her reaction was even stronger when she saw the photos of David with the other women. Clear evidence that their relationship was not the exclusive romance she had believed it to be. This photograph was taken on November 15th at the Carlton Hotel, Jennifer explained, pointing to an image of David with a blonde woman Sarah didn't recognize. Mr. Martinez paid for this hotel room using funds embezzled from his employer. According to the receipt, he also charged champagne and room service to the same fraudulent account. Sarah glanced back at Rebecca, who was staring at the photograph with a mixture of hurt and anger. November 15th was significant because Sarah remembered Rebecca mentioning that date during their hallway conversation. It was Rebecca's birthday, and David had told her he had to work late. On December 3rd, Jennifer continued, presenting another photograph. Mr. Martinez was photographed at Chez Laurent with a different woman. The dinner bill for this evening was $340. Paid for with the company credit card under a false business expense claim. David's attorney was frantically taking notes and whispering to his client, but David seemed incapable of responding. He just sat there staring at the evidence of his crimes being displayed for everyone to see. Judge Williams examined each piece of evidence carefully. "Ms. Rodriguez, have you reported these findings to Mr. Martinez's employer?" "Not yet, Your Honor. We wanted to present the evidence in court first, as it directly impacts the divorce settlement and child support arrangements." Sarah knew that this was actually strategic. Jennifer was giving Heartfelt Financial Services the opportunity to learn about the embezzlement through court proceedings rather than a direct report, which might make them more cooperative in recovering the stolen funds for Emma's benefit. Jennifer then presented the most damaging evidence of all, recorded phone conversations between David and his various women, obtained legally through the private investigator's work. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to play excerpts from several phone conversations that demonstrate Mr. Martinez's systematic deception of multiple parties." The judge nodded, and Jennifer activated a small recording device. David's voice filled the courtroom, clear and recognizable. In the first recording, David was talking to Rebecca about his divorce. Sarah is being completely unreasonable about the settlement. She's trying to claim the baby is mine, but the timing doesn't work out. I think she was seeing someone else, and now she's trying to pin it on me. Sarah felt a surge of anger hearing David's lies played back in his own voice. She glanced at Rebecca, who looked sick. The second recording was David talking to the woman from the Carlton Hotel. My divorce should be finalized soon, and then we can start making plans. Rebecca and I are just friends now. I'm not really interested in anything serious with her. The third recording was the most damaging. David was talking to someone at Heartfelt Financial Services about expense reports. Yeah, the Patterson account has been very active lately. Lots of client entertainment expenses, but it's all legitimate. You know how these big accounts require special attention. There was no Patterson account. Jennifer had already established that this was the fraudulent account David had created to justify his embezzlement. As the recordings played, Sarah watched David sink lower in his chair. There was no way to deny or explain away his own voice telling contradictory stories to different people and lying about company business. When the recordings finished, the courtroom was silent except for Emma's soft cooing sounds as she finished her bottle. Even Judge Williams looked shocked by the scope of David's deception. Harrison finally found his voice. Your Honor, my client invokes his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and declines to respond to these allegations at this time. Judge Williams nodded. That's his right, Mr. Harrison. However, these allegations have serious implications for both this divorce proceeding and potential criminal charges. I'm ordering an immediate forensic accounting of Mr. Martinez's finances, and I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. This was exactly what she had hoped for. David wouldn't be able to hide behind his lies anymore, and Emma would get the financial support she deserved. But Judge Williams wasn't finished. Furthermore, given the evidence of Mr. Martinez's financial crimes and deception, I'm granting Mrs. Martinez temporary sole custody of the child, with supervised visitation rights for Mr. Martinez pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. David stood up abruptly. Your Honor, that's not fair. I haven't been convicted of anything. You can't take away my rights as a father based on accusations. Mr. Martinez, Judge Williams said sternly, you've been presented with evidence that you embezzled over $47,000 from your employer to finance extramarital affairs while your wife was pregnant. You've been shown to have systematically lied to multiple parties, including your own attorney. Until we determine the full scope of your criminal activity, I believe supervised visitation is appropriate. Sarah felt a mix of relief and vindication. Emma would be protected, and David would face consequences for his actions. But she also felt sad for the baby, who would grow up with this complicated, painful story about her father. Rebecca suddenly stood up in the back of the courtroom. Your Honor, may I approach? Judge Williams looked surprised. Ms. Chun, you're not a party to these proceedings. What do you wish to address? Rebecca walked forward, her composure finally completely shattered. Your Honor, I work for Heartfelt Financial Services. I'm a senior accountant there, and I've been having a relationship with Mr. Martinez. I need to know if I'm in legal jeopardy because of the money he spent on our relationship. The courtroom erupted in whispers and murmurs. This was an unexpected development that even Jennifer Rodriguez hadn't anticipated. Judge Williams called for order. Ms. Chun, you should consult with an attorney before making any statements in court. However, I will note that if you were unaware of the source of Mr. Martinez's funds and you're willing to cooperate with the investigation, that will likely be taken into consideration. Rebecca nodded. I understand, Your Honor. I just wanted to make it clear that I had no knowledge of any embezzlement. Mr. Martinez told me he had received a promotion and bonuses that explained his increased income. Sarah watched David's reaction to Rebecca's public distancing of herself from his crimes. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse, which, Sarah reflected, was exactly what was happening. Jennifer Rodriguez seized the opportunity. Your Honor, Ms. Chin's cooperation would be valuable in determining the full scope of Mr. Martinez's crimes and in recovering funds for Mrs. Martinez and the child. Judge Williams agreed. Ms. Chun, I strongly encourage you to obtain legal representation and cooperate fully with the investigation. Mr. Harrison, your client should also consider the benefits of cooperation, though I understand he may choose to exercise his constitutional rights. As the afternoon wore on, the judge addressed the practical matters of the divorce. Given David's financial crimes, the division of assets was straightforward. Sarah would receive the house, the legitimate savings accounts, and full full custody of Emma. David would be responsible for child support based on his actual income, plus restitution for the embezzled funds. More importantly, Judge Williams ordered that any recovered embezzled funds would go directly to a trust fund for Emma's education and support. When court finally adjourned at 4:30 p.m., Sarah felt emotionally drained but victorious. She had gotten justice for herself and protection for her daughter. David would face criminal charges, and Emma would be financially secure. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Sarah noticed that Rebecca approached David one final time. Their conversation was brief and intense, with Rebecca doing most of the talking while David listened with his head down. Sarah couldn't hear what was being said, but Rebecca's body language made it clear that she was ending their relationship definitively. Jennifer Rodriguez helped Sarah pack up their evidence and documents. "That went better than I expected," Jennifer said. Having Ms. Chun realize she needed to protect herself and cooperate with the investigation was a gift. "It strengthens the criminal case against David significantly." Sarah nodded, adjusting Emma's carrier on her arm. "What happens next?" "The district attorney will take over the criminal investigation. David will probably be arrested within the week once they review all our evidence. Hartwell Financial Services will conduct their own internal investigation and will likely file a civil suit to recover the stolen funds." As they walked out of the courthouse, Sarah felt the warm afternoon sun on her face for the first time in months. She had been dreading this day for so long, but now that it was over, she felt lighter than she had in ages. Rebecca was standing near the courthouse steps, talking on her phone with what was obviously her attorney. When she saw Sarah approaching, she ended her call and walked over. "Sarah," Rebecca said, "I wanted to thank you for warning me about the legal implications. If you hadn't told me to get a lawyer, I might have made statements that could have implicated me in David's crimes." Sarah looked at Rebecca with a mixture of understanding and residual anger. "Rebecca, I'm not going to pretend that what you did was okay. You had an affair with my husband while I was pregnant. But I also recognize that David lied to you just like he lied to me." Rebecca nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I really thought he loved me. I thought we were going to build a life together. I feel so stupid for believing him." "You're not stupid," Sarah said. "David is very good at making people believe what he wants them to believe. But now you know the truth, and you can make decisions based on reality instead of his lies." Emma began to fuss again, reminding Sarah that despite all the drama and legal proceedings, she had a 3-month-old daughter who needed her attention. "I should go," Sarah said. "Emma needs to be fed and changed, and we both need some quiet time after today." Rebecca watched as Sarah adjusted the baby carrier and gathered her things. "Sarah, what you did today, exposing David's crimes and protecting your daughter, that took incredible courage. I hope someday I can be that strong." Sarah looked at Rebecca one final time. "You're stronger than you think. You figured out the truth and made the right choice to protect yourself. That's not nothing." As Sarah walked to her car, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been a married woman expecting her first child with a man she thought she loved. Today, she was a single mother who had just destroyed her ex-husband's life in court with the help of his former lover. But she didn't feel guilty about what she had done. David had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. Sarah had protected herself and her daughter, and that was what mattered. Emma fell asleep during the drive home, exhausted by the long day at the courthouse. As Sarah pulled into her driveway, she looked at the house that was now officially hers alone. It would need work, and money would be tight until the restitution came through, but it was theirs. Inside the house, Sarah fed Emma and put her down for a nap. Then, she sat in the nursery, watching her daughter sleep and thinking about the future they would build together. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Jennifer Rodriguez. "Sarah," Jennifer said, "I just got a call from the district attorney's office. They're moving quickly on David's case. He'll be arrested tomorrow morning at his office." Sarah felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. "What about Rebecca?" "She's cooperating fully. Her attorney contacted the DA's office this afternoon, and she's providing a complete statement about her relationship with David and the money he spent on her. She's also turning over all the gifts and documenting everything she can remember." "Will she face charges?" "Unlikely, if she continues to cooperate. The evidence suggests she was genuinely unaware of the embezzlement. She's also agreeing to testify against David if the case goes to trial. After hanging up, Sarah looked around the nursery she had painted while David was off with his lovers. The soft yellow walls and white furniture looked peaceful in the late afternoon light. This room represented hope and new beginnings, and Sarah was determined to make sure Emma's childhood was filled with honesty and love, everything that had been missing from her marriage to David. The doorbell rang, and Sarah reluctantly left the nursery to answer it. She was surprised to find a delivery person with a large bouquet of flowers. The card read, "Sarah, thank you for showing me the truth. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I hope you and Emma have a beautiful life together." Rebecca, Sarah stared at the card for a long moment. It didn't erase the betrayal or the months of pain, but it was something, an acknowledgement of what had happened and a hope for healing. She put the flowers in a vase and placed them on the kitchen table where she could see them while she prepared dinner. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as David's arrest became public and the full scope of his crimes was revealed. There would be media attention, gossip at work, and the difficult process of rebuilding her life as a single mother. But tonight, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: peace. She had fought for justice and won. She had protected her daughter and secured their future. And she had discovered that she was much stronger than she had ever imagined. As the sun set outside her kitchen window, Sarah began making plans for the life she and Emma would build together, free from the lies and betrayal that had defined the past year. It would be different from the life she had planned, but it would be honest, and it would be theirs. False client accounts and falsified expense reports. That's not borrowing, that's embezzlement. The bailiff from their courtroom appeared in the hallway, calling for people to return for the afternoon session. Sarah looked at David and Rebecca, both of whom appeared to be in shock for different reasons. "We need to go back in," Sarah said. "Whatever you two need to work out, it'll have to wait." As they walked back toward the courtroom, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. The morning had been difficult, but successful. The evidence was out, David's lies were exposed, and both Rebecca and the judge now understood the true scope of his deception. The afternoon session would bring even more revelations, including the criminal investigation that was about to be launched. But Sarah felt ready for whatever came next. She had her daughter, she had the truth, and she had the satisfaction of knowing that David would finally face consequences for his actions. As they entered the courtroom, Sarah noticed that Rebecca no longer walked beside David. Instead, she chose a seat several rows behind him, as far away as possible while still being present for the proceedings. The transformation was complete. The confident couple who had entered the courthouse that morning as partners was now fractured beyond repair, and the afternoon promised to bring even more devastating revelations that would change all their lives forever. A surge of strength and determination. She had spent months planning for this day, gathering evidence, building her case, and preparing for every possible challenge David might present. She had endured the humiliation of his affair, the stress of pregnancy complications, and the fear of facing an uncertain future as a single mother. But she had also discovered reserves of courage and intelligence she hadn't known she possessed. The quiet, accommodating wife who had accepted David's excuses and believed his lies was gone. In her place was a woman who refused to be victimized, who fought for what was right, and who was determined to protect her daughter at all costs. The morning was far from over, and Sarah knew that the most explosive revelations were still to come. But as she sat in that courtroom, holding her baby daughter while the evidence of David's betrayal was laid bare for everyone to see, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. She felt powerful. Judge Williams called for a lunch recess, giving both sides time to review the evidence that had been presented and prepare for the afternoon session. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Sarah carefully placed Emma back in her carrier and began packing her papers. She could feel David's eyes on her as she prepared to leave, but she didn't look in his direction. She had said everything she needed to say through her lawyer and her evidence. The time for explanations and conversations had passed long ago. As Sarah walked toward the exit, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Rebecca approaching, her perfect composure finally cracked, and her face showing the strain of the morning's revelations. "Sarah," Rebecca said quietly, "can we talk?"